Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar. This is Webinar 6. Today's topic is services evaluation, planning and conducting evaluations of your own. And this is our last webinar of the cohort and our last webinar before our in-person meeting in Vancouver. So let me just say thank you to all of our participants, our faculty and our postdoctoral fellows for all the work that everyone has done this cohort. It has been a pleasure. So today's webinar is going to shake out like this. So we've got a guest speaker, which is Sara Mannheimer from Montana State University. She'll do her presentation. We'll have some time for Q&A and discussion with her. And we'll also move to your slides as a result of the group activity that Jason posted in Clear Connect. We'll finish up with a few housekeeping items, including some information on our upcoming in-person meeting. And once again, feel free to tweet about today's session at the hashtag eResearchNetwork and mention ClearDLF. And just real quickly, you may have seen an email go out today about pre-registration for the 2016 cohort of the eResearch Network. So if you have seen that, then help us get the word out and share with your colleagues. Okay, and so with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Jason, and he's going to be introducing our guest speaker and facilitating today's session. So Jason, the floor is yours. Okay, Jason, your microphone's on mute, so whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can people
Okay,
hear
great.
me?
All yours.
Great. Okay, thank you. So I'm excited to introduce our first speaker. Today we're going to be talking, so the first 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, Sara will speak a bit more about her experience building, starting to build metrics and to do an analysis of our local research data needs at Montana State University. She is the data management librarian here at Montana State University. Been here about a year, give or take. And her job is much like many of the people within the cohort. She works on everything from data services to digital preservation to consulting on data management planning. You name it. If you think through data services, this is part of what Sara works on. And we're really excited to have her here to speak and also actually on staff at MSU. So I'm going to give over the floor in just one moment. I did want to kind of mention that, so we'll work through the first 20-25 minutes. We'll leave a little some questions for Sara. And then we're going to focus more on our slides and our readings to build a discussion later on with the rest of the seminar. So there'll probably be 20 minutes on our slides and then also a little bit of time to allow for discussion around the readings. And really, I also want to allow a little more time at the end just to talk about what expectations we might have for the in-person meeting and any other feedback related to the whole eResearch Network experience this year. So with that, I'll actually hand over the floor. Sara, if you're ready, please feel free to push forward your slides. There we go.
So thanks for having me here and talk about the census that we had. The census was in collaboration with the library, or it was a collaboration between the library and us. We got a bit of input. And our survey was also informed by
Sara, can we get your mic closer? Is that possible, or can you turn up? Keep talking.
Okay. So our survey was informed by. Does that sound better?
Yeah.
Okay. So I added a resources slide at the end if you'd like to see some of the resources that we looked at during our process. So the survey we were looking to find out the size and the types of research data on campus. We were also looking at data storage and backup behaviors among researchers and data sharing behaviors. And then if they didn't share and if they didn't back up, we were trying to find out what the key barriers were in order to try to help. So really the main goal of the survey was to gauge the interest in and the need for our institutional data curation, storage, and publication services. The census was distributed in January of this year, and it was sent with an email that was co-signed by our Vice President for Research, the Dean of the Library, and the CIO in order to give it a bit of important people saying you should fill the survey out. And these three also helped with publicity and helped encourage responses. We have an institutional subscription to Qualtrics, so that helped with our distribution and then later with our analysis. And in that cover letter the VPR and the Dean and the CIO sent, they said the purpose of the survey was to gain insight about the research data so that we could direct our future investments and our future priorities. So the idea was help us help you. So before sending the survey, we had a few assumptions about the data on campus. We thought that most researchers would store their data digitally on a personal computer or a hard drive. We thought researchers would create a wide variety of data formats and that researchers would have pretty small amounts of data. We were thinking probably less than 100 gigs. We also thought that researchers would probably be sharing, but within their research teams and labs, and that maybe some researchers shared data after their article publication or after their grant was over in accordance with some of the data management planning requirements. And then we also thought that our researchers who had bigger data were more likely to want and need our campus data services. So let's move to our results. We heard mostly back from faculty and then some staff and administrators. Most of our respondents were from the College of Letters and Science, College of Ag, and College of Engineering. And then our questions about storage format and size. Oops. Our assumption here was that most researchers would store their data digitally on a personal computer or external hard drive. Turned out there were actually quite a few researchers who responded that they stored their data in paper format. So that was a surprise to us. And it made us realize that we might need to think more about paper and physical data. And we're actually starting a pilot digitizing some lab notebooks as a response to this. So we will see how that goes. Next, we thought researchers would create a wide variety of data formats. And our results showed that actually most of the data on campus is either text, spreadsheet, or image. So that's actually good news for us because we know how to handle those formats. There are a few definitely other types of data that are going to be more challenging, but the majority of our data is simple for us to work with, simple for us to provide data management guidance. We assumed that researchers would have small amounts of data. That turned out not to be true. Here's the pie chart on data size. About half of our researchers have less than 100 gigs, but about, let's see, almost 40% have more than 100 gigs. And at this point, our institutional repository can only handle up to 10 gigs of data, so you can see only 20% of our researchers have less than 10 gigs. So this was a real wake-up call and another reminder that the library and IT really need to work closely together in order to store large amounts of data and curate large amounts of data. The data sharing questions that we asked, our first assumption was that researchers do share data within research teams and labs. That was true. 90% of our researchers said that they share within the university. So we assume that much of that sharing is to support research collaborations and teaching. But we probably should have asked for clarification on this question just to really understand the nature of this sharing. So that is a lesson learned. We also thought researchers would share after article publication or upon grant completion. It turns out they do share after publication, but very few said that the grant ending was an impetus for sharing their data. Then this slide is a bit on the bleak side because it shows that column on the right that 41% of our respondents don't share data publicly at all. So this slide shows that we do have work to do. For interest in data services, we thought researchers with bigger data were more likely to need us, and that was also true. As the data got bigger, more people reported that they wanted information about our services. And then we also analyzed some correlated responses. First, we found that those who share data tend to also use other people's data. So you can see here that 78% of those who share data download data from repositories and use it themselves, whereas only 37% of those who don't share their own data use data from other sources. Those with larger amounts of data also tend to use other people's data. So we've got 90% of those with more than a terabyte of their own data use data from other sources. Of those with less than 10 gigs, only 40% used other data. Those who back up their data annotate their data. This is kind of a no-brainer. If you're caring for your data enough to back it up, you also want to make sure that it's described well and you can understand it in the future. So 55% of those who back up their data annotate their data. Only 20% of those who don't back up annotate. And lastly, those researchers with large data sets are more likely to annotate their data. This also makes sense to us. If you have more data, it's more important that that data be understandable and that you have a system for making sense of it. So in combination with the survey, we set up about 10 follow-up interviews with faculty members. There was an external researcher who was hired to conduct the interviews, but I was able to sit in and listen. We scheduled interviews with people from a wide variety of departments and research centers, so electrical and computer engineering, plant sciences, ag, econ, and economics, history, land resources, environmental science, ecology, college of engineering, physics, spatial sciences center. So we were hoping to get a nice cross-section of views from these faculty members. When we talked to the researchers about data sharing, we found that the researchers weren't always sure how large their data was in terms of size, but they could describe the tools they use to work with the data. Like, could the data be shared through an email attachment, or can it be stored on an external drive, or does it require deposit in some kind of special cluster or repository? And this validated our thought that using practical definitions would help researchers talk about data. So in our survey, when we had asked about the size of people's data, we had said, is your data 10 gigs or less, which means that it would fit on a thumb drive, or is it 100 gigs, which means it would fit on your computer? Is it more than 100 gigs, which means you'd need an external drive, or is it larger than a terabyte? So I think we thought, and our interviews confirmed, that by framing all the complexities of research data management within the language of real-world storage methods and routines, we wanted to be able to bridge gaps in understanding, because across disciplines and even between the library and IT, campus IT, there's a ton of different jargon and there's varied technical expertise. So it's important to make sure that everyone is understanding each other. Here's a few quotes from our interviews as well. One researcher said, it's important for the data to be public. There should be no black boxes. We need systems that promote transparency and reproducibility in science. So he was really preaching to the choir, and I hope that he will turn out to be one of the champions for our data services. Another researcher said, the journals where I typically publish have no data archiving requirements, so that's not an activity I end up doing. And then a third researcher said that journals with a high impact factor in his field do require data. So there's obviously a wide variety of attitudes toward data sharing, and it really is based on your discipline, what the norms are in that discipline, what your activities are. We also asked about definitions of big data, so-called big data. And unsurprisingly, we got a huge variation in responses. A history faculty member doing a digital humanities project said a 50 kilobyte data set is big for him just because it's hard for him to figure out how it interacts with his project, and it's hard for him to figure out how to back it up. Another researcher who's working with 10 gigs of data said it's not big data because it's much smaller than his previous project. And then a third researcher said that managing multiple tiny data sets can be just as labor intensive as working with big data. So there's no consensus on this term. And a quote that I heard at RDOT this year was, big data is data that is too big for you. And I think that was really what we heard from these researchers as well. We also found from the interviews that our researchers are collaborating a lot. All of our interviewees said that they collaborate with other campuses and other institutions, and they described some challenges that were inherent in these collaborations, especially when working with data and collaborating using data. There are different IT infrastructures at each institution, different data handling routines, different storage and access requirements, and different cultural practices as you work interdisciplinarily. And so as the researchers discussed these collaborative efforts, we became more aware of the need for research cyber infrastructure that recognizes that our campus might be an artificial boundary. So we need to think, when we think about IT resources, when we think about library services, we have to think bigger. We have to realize that our researchers are not just working within our institution, but with the whole country and world, really. A couple of quotes about collaboration. Many of the respondents focused on communication difficulties. There was this common theme that there's so much jargon, so many different terms floating around regarding data. So one of the researchers said, we need to create an interdisciplinary Rosetta Stone to make data shareable. And another said, there's no language to talk about data processes that facilitate sharing. So I think the librarian and IT staff's role is partly that of a translator, really, in this situation, trying to make connections between researchers, between IT, between data storage providers. And then our last and favorite interview result was people love the library. All of the interviewees we talked to said they would use our data services, especially dataset annotation and metadata markup, assistant with deposit in repositories, educational programs, and data outreach and publicity. And in fact, one of the researchers we talked to, MSU has a monthly newsletter, email newsletter that lists all of the research publications from that month and celebrates those publications. And one of our interviewees said, wouldn't it be a great idea if we could include recently published data sets from MSU researchers and let the community know that those data sets are available for reuse. So that was cool to hear people really engaging with the library and our services. And then, so we made a few key discoveries with the census. First is that the data census created a foundation of knowledge about data on campus. We were able to learn about the size, about the storage practices, about the sharing practices, and that was really helpful to know. Second, the census will help us improve our understanding of the local research data environment. So now that we know these basics, we can start to dig in farther, and we can talk to researchers, understand department by department what's going on. the campus will also inform campus IT and library priorities for the CIO and our dean. That also means where we're going to invest our money. So it is very important. We're trying to figure out what are the needs, and then we can start to address those needs. And the census, maybe most importantly, confirmed that campus IT and the library are really tightly linked in this endeavor. We have to work closely together if we're going to be able to meet the needs of these big data and of researchers with more and more requirements and more complex systems. A few lessons that we learned over the course of our survey development. One was we did some research at the beginning, but I think we could have benefited more from reading more of about other institutions' data surveys and some of the assessment frameworks that we read about in the readings for today's webinar. Second, we tried to balance the length of our survey with the depth of information gathered. But we wished we would have asked a few more questions to dig deeper, especially into reasons that researchers had for sharing or not sharing data, and specific data services that researchers need on campus. Advocate for the information the library wants to collect. Our data census was driven, a key player in driving the census was our CIO, and so our census had a bit of an IT focus. So in retrospect, I think we'd want to put in a few more library-specific questions so that we can get our questions answered. And then lastly, seek IRB approval, which we did not. And so it looks like we may not be able to share the data, the survey data that we collected. We do have our survey instrument posted to our institutional repository. I talked with someone at IRB yesterday, and she said it's possible that we could get an exemption and say that we're analyzing so-called existing data since we've already collected it. I'm a little confused about how that works, but hopefully that will allow us to share our data because I think it could be helpful to others. And then our next steps. We're going to use the data census instrument to validate other research. For example, I'm working on a project using sentiment analysis to determine researchers' attitudes toward data sharing. And I think we're going to be able to take the disciplines we're analyzing on Twitter and compare them with the departments who answered our data census and see if the results validate each other. So that'll be really cool. And then we plan to revise the survey and redistribute it early next year. So we'll have an opportunity to take some of the lessons learned and apply them to a new version of the survey. So that's it. I'm happy to answer questions or have some discussion. So Jason says, with this assessment in place, where do you see the opportunities to start to measure the success of RDM? Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think by repeating the census every year or every other year, hopefully we'll be able to see higher rates of sharing or more understanding regarding data management. Yeah.
So related to that, you would see that as potentially something you would put forward to administrators about this is a possible metric of success. If we've seen more sharing, that's a result. Or if we see more data management consults, that's a result worth sharing or worth measuring.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and I think the census helped us establish this baseline. And so that is really going to help us with future assessment measures. And we'll be able to look back on it and say, oh, in 2015, 40% of researchers didn't share. So I think the census was a really great experience. And I think we're still sort of seeing how it will help us. And then you also ask what type of team, skills, or interests might work best to bring together for assessment. So for our census, we had 3 employees of research cyber infrastructure there in the campus IT team. And we had 4 librarians. And then we also had input from the CIO and from the dean of the library. So for us, I think it was extremely helpful to have campus IT and the library both as part of the team, just because their storage aspect, they store the data, and that's a really important part of our jobs as well. So I think it not only helped us find out more information, but it helped us as we talked through the census and as we drafted it together. It helped us understand each other better. It helped us understand where our jobs overlapped and where we might be separate. And Margaret says, did you look at which disciplines used data from other sources? No, we didn't, but that's a good idea. I think as we learned in the follow-up interviews, each of the disciplines had really different ideas of what data sharing was and what data sharing was expected. So I think that would definitely be a worthwhile chart to develop. Yeah, and I see Margarita also has a discipline question. We're sort of still in the process of analyzing the data, so I'll write these down. I think that could be really helpful.
So Sarah, I'm typing, but I think I'm just going to speak because it's probably faster.
Okay.
You kind of mentioned that there were different questions, different approaches to data that informed how ITC, that's our local information office or information organization, was bringing to the questions. How were they different from library questions? Was there less of a focus on access or sharing, or I'm speculating, so what were the challenges in crafting those questions with an IT organization?
Right.
Were there challenges?
I think there were. Some of them had to do with priorities. So we asked a lot of questions about data size and data backup and data annotation. And then I would say the other place where the library and IT didn't quite communicate was in using terms. So they say annotation, we would probably say description or metadata. So annotation was what was used on the survey, but talking about these problems of translation, I think it would be helpful to us to maybe talk to some researchers or come up with terms that are going to make the most sense. Yeah. And I think we could also, as in our library interests, obviously are more towards data sharing and more towards data description. So while we did ask those questions, I am hoping that in the next version of the survey, we'll be able to dig a little deeper into sharing and into description in order to help us figure out what's going to be an effective way to advocate for those things and how interested researchers are in learning about those things. Plato asks, how does the library handle data requests and opportunities that exceed our capacity? We haven't had any yet, but the plan is we do have some big data sets that are being handled by research cyber infrastructure, which is part of our IT department. and those were the guys who were part of our census development. And so we have 400 terabytes, at least a data set, a climate data set that's 400 terabytes that's on a new cluster that's being developed here. So we do have the capacity to store it, but I think the way the library hasn't quite, we're working on a pilot for, sorry, I'm a little all over the place. We're working on a pilot program with a smaller data set where our institutional repository is going to link to that cluster that has the capacity to handle very large data sets. So I think what we're doing is really focusing on that partnership between us and ITC, and maybe using our institutional repository as an index, sort of a metadata record that will then point to this giant cluster. And we do have a Globus endpoint that we use on campus that can be used to transfer really large amounts of data as well. So it's really still in the works, but that partnership is going to be extremely important.
Okay, it's 11:30. So do we have any further questions for Sarah? And Sarah, you please do stay around.
Yeah.
We're going to work through some of the slides. I think you've seen, you're familiar because you were a participant last year. And then we're also going to talk about the readings if you wanted to participate there. So please do feel free to stick around. And we can pass along Sarah's contact information as well if there are other follow-ups that people have for her. And also, thank you for presenting this. It seems like this first data census exercise is a really good baseline. It gives you a data point so you can start to think about what types of metrics you might put in place for success.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Thanks for your great questions, too.
Okay. So Rita, I don't know if I can share screen. It doesn't really matter if I do or not. Actually, I'm going to stop and just share my screen and see if people can see this. Can people see this agenda? This is where we were going to just want to give a snapshot of what the rest of the day looks like. So I'm sharing my screen, but we'll probably move quickly to our discussion of activity 1, which is our slides. So Rita, if you have those slides, I can hand it back over to you. But we'll probably work for about another 20 minutes on that and see where the discussion goes, if that's okay. Rita, can you hear me?
Yes, I do have the slides. They're in the slide deck with Sarah's presentation, so when you are finished sharing your screen, we can go back to that.
Okay, I will stop it. Too small, sorry. Put that up later.
And our first slide comes to us from Caltech, and I see Donna is with us. Donna, is your audio connected? You can also dial in if you haven't done so already.
Looks like she's working on it. She says, hang on.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Is this loud enough? Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. We found our consult actually very helpful in terms of thinking about this. And our approach right now is we're still kind of figuring out what our services are going to look like and how we're going to assess and evaluate that is going to be dependent on what service we eventually offer. We don't have the option of doing a campus survey at this time. That may be something that we can do in the future, but a couple of the ideas that we brainstormed in terms of bringing up research data services would be partnering with on-campus groups to offer a data literacy workshop. We do have the Center for Data-Driven Discovery here, and I've been talking to the person in charge of that, and that's basically their job, is to consult with people about making their data usable, metadata, things like that. So we'd like to look into possibly winter or spring term, partnering with them and offering, a venue, having them come and give a talk about this and open it to campus. And, in terms of assessment evaluation, the usual surveys, in-class engagement, pre-post surveys about their knowledge about research data management, that kind of thing. So that's one option, and that actually looks like, that has a very good chance of actually coming online within the next 6 months. In terms of digital scholarship support, another service that we're looking into is bringing, supporting Overleaf for latex thesis preparation, and also we have, I think we're going to have the Lab Archives ELN vendor come to campus. So these kind of tie in just, in terms of digital scholarship in general. So we're looking at, again, supporting, hosting workshops, and also trying to figure out, get data about who's using this, how many active users do we have, do specific outreach to our specific departments and say, hey, we have these new services, if you have questions, come talk to us, and kind of measure engagement that way. Again, we're still not quite sure what that's going to look like, but those are two things definitely on the horizon. And the other one, in terms of things that we're actually still doing, things that we have been doing, are things like, supporting data publication. So we've had people ask about, this is kind of very community demand driven. We have people asking, can I store data from my theses? My journal has a requirement for data sharing. My funder has a requirement for data sharing. And a lot of this are just individual people kind of reaching out to us and just saying, like they find our LibGuide or they find our contact information. So I think that there's definitely an interest there, and I think that that is a driver towards, putting together at least some amount of services that we can then broadly advertise. Because this isn't something that we've, blanket sent to campus. This is, again, this kind of highlights the very individual nature and very disjointed nature of our campus where, the liaison librarians, have very specific relationships with their departments or with particular groups. So like we have a liaison to the graduate school. And so that we're getting a lot of questions that way without really having to advertise that this is something that we know about. And again, we don't want to advertise until we know what we can offer. So that's, kind of dog chasing tail there a little bit. But again, so yeah, we've been getting requests for storing dissertation supplemental data and stuff for archiving. And that could turn into, as I said before, sort of a toolkit, in the arsenal of our liaison librarians for department outreach. So I think that once we think about what, okay, what are we actually going to concretely offer, deploy this to the liaison librarians, do some sort of coordinated outreach, and then sort of see what that uptake is, and then sort of go from there. And actually, this I will blatantly admit I stole from an RDAP talk, and this is something that we've been thinking about doing for a little while, is compile a list of journals with data sharing requirements, and then see who on our campus has been publishing there, and has that compliance actually been met. And our institutional repository, the Caltech Collection of Open Digital Archives, or Caltech CODA, this can be done fairly easily since we have a pretty complete record of
all the scholarship that's been, in terms of published journal articles that have been done on campus back to at least since 2009. And so that would cover a large chunk of the mandate era. And, this is something to kind of look at, and that's sort of a very easy way to identify, okay, maybe the faculty sort of in this area, yeah, they sort of know what they're doing, so maybe we'll concentrate our efforts on areas where it doesn't look like there's compliance, or that, or if everybody seems to have it all figured out. I highly doubt that, but, it's Caltech, you never know. If they, if that's something that, maybe we don't need to pay much attention to, then we can focus our efforts elsewhere. So again, all of this is still kind of, kind of a work in progress. And I think, as I said before, I think once we know what our services are going to be, that's going to sort of dictate, the assessment and the evaluation. And I think it's going to be a much more organic, much more individual, possibly even one-on-one type endeavor. Again, given the fact that a campus-wide instrument like a survey at this time is not available to us. So okay, I guess that's all I got. Looking forward to hear what everybody else has too.
Temple, Margaret, is your audio connected? I know you didn't send in any slides, but feel free to talk. I just made a placeholder here for you, so whenever you're ready.
Thanks. Gretchen is also on.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so we didn't have a slide, right? Okay.
Yeah. We're kind of in the same place as far as like we, don't have, our services are just getting started, so we're still trying to figure out what they're going to look like. So trying to come up with some form for that is really going to be the precursor to our assessment strategies.
And similarly to what Donna said, we did have an initial consult, and what we did was share a document which described what we initially thought our research data services would be, and got Kendall arranged for some feedback for us on that. So one of the things we'll do is using that feedback, redesign that document and incorporate that into our rethink of our plan for services.
Yes, one of the other things that we've been doing here, or that we've been talking about here, is starting to get some baselines about data questions that get asked as to our reference staff, or really anyone in the libraries. And what we normally do for like reference questions is we track them with a SpringShare product, and we're trying to figure out if there's a way that we can use that to note when things are data related, and trying to figure out how we want to do that. If we can add like a radio button that says this was a data question. And there's some pushback on that for various reasons. And then a different way we could go about it is to try to come up with some sort of agreed upon language for all of the librarians to sort of tag all of those entries. And then another librarian that we work with has talked about just creating a completely separate form to track these kinds of questions, and also the answers that the library staff provide, so that we can kind of see not only what's getting asked of us, but how we're handling them, and seeing if there are training needs, or if people got this, or whatever. It's sort of like an internal data queue.
And it's interesting because in order to change the, I think it's a Lib Analytics, that's the SpringShare product that we're using to capture reference questions and consultations. to make any changes to that form, we need to go through a library assessment librarian who, you know, is juggling lots of other things. So, you know, adding anything to that form creates potential challenges for the whole system. So that's one of our challenges.
Yeah. I think you have all the notes with you, Gretchen.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the other, I'll turn this over to you. Margaret's been offering a data management series of workshops. So do you want to talk a little bit about the sort of assessment you might do around that or evaluation?
Yeah, so what my plan is with these workshops, we've done one, and then we have our second one tomorrow. And the first one had 2 attendees that were not library staff. So I sent them an evaluation afterwards. So we'll be doing that tomorrow and with the third one to kind of get an idea of whether or not we're meeting their needs, if there's something else they would rather hear about. Also, you know, keeping track of like who comes to these things. We actually rescheduled the one that's tomorrow and had some interesting feedback about people wanting to go to it, and so that's a fun little informal assessment, and seeing that people seem to be interested in this topic.
Yeah. So
there was one other thing we were going to talk about.
Do you remember what it was?
Nope. maybe the consultation was the first thing we talked about. Was the third thing I'm thinking of.
Yeah. So it's, again, still really early days for us, and I think one of our sort of assessments is going to be, you know, at the end of this whole process of the eResearch network is finalizing sort of our plan for going forward. We've already made some progress on the earlier plan, and sort of looking at that and making sure that we continue to make progress. And, you know, a lot of that is making the connections and starting to offer the services that we're comfortable with. And, yeah, so that's where we're at.
Yeah.
I see you have a question, Margaret, from Donna.
Oh, yeah. I don't have I have the slides up for the first one because it was just the overview that I've done before. It's really heavily based on the Necdemic and the Mantra programs. And then, so the first one we just did like an overview with a focus on how to use spreadsheets and file naming stuff. And tomorrow's is about documenting data with README files and data dictionaries and metadata and code books. And once I'm done putting those slides together, then I can share those with you guys. And then the third one we're doing is on storage options and the 3-2-1 rule, basically. Oh, and we advertised, we put up flyers all over, and we have like a big one in the main science building. And then I send out emails to my departments and hope they don't get ignored. That's make use of listservs, and you know, and one of the audiences is our internal library audience. So, and because we're hoping that liaison librarians throughout will be supporting this, it's an important audience as well. But we also put it on the university calendar and our own calendar of events for our library, and we tweet it usually before it happens. Yeah, and we're hoping it will grow, and we've picked a new time slot and day for holding sort of events. So we had gotten some large audiences last year at a different day and time. So, you know, one of the things is we have to evaluate whether this is the correct time slot as well. So, okay.
Thank you, Margaret.
Yep, we're done.
Okay. Thank you both, Margaret and Gretchen. Okay. Up next is the University of Florida. Lori, the floor is yours when you're ready.
Yeah, so some of the things that we've been working on, we just hired a new assessment librarian. I think she's starting in January. And I saw that the news went live on FSU's site for Plato, also starting as our new data management librarian. Yay! So we've got new people coming in. Great news. For our assessment service programs, full evaluation. Yeah, I don't know if Plato announced that yet, but I saw it on the FSU website. I wasn't trying to steal your thunder or anything, Plato. Just, yep, yay! But some of the things that we've been working on right now, we have a draft towards policy document. So it's a longer, here are best practices, here are guidelines, working towards a set of policy documents for use in implementing services, programs, and then for the full process with the program evaluation and assessment embedded within that. So policy documents for what people need to use for programmatic approaches, and then the assessment will be part of it as well. We're also going through a trusted repository audit checklist for trusted digital repository status. That's a peer review process in collaboration with the University of North Texas. Our Clinical Translational and Science Institute does a regular survey of faculty, all faculty within them, and then all faculty more broadly on campus who are connected with collaborative research, bench-to-bedside research. And so that survey also informs the data needs. We've done a survey in the past, and we've done more than one survey in the past, one cross-campus, one targeting particular groups. Other things that we have upcoming for assessment evaluation feedback, we have our first ever Digital Humanities Boot Camp in 2016, which will be, it's an interesting dynamic format. It's a boot camp, but it's largely to have people identify with the work that they are doing, that is digital humanities data research. And we'll be embedding a pre and post survey on this because it's a lot about changing perceptions and understanding. We have a new pilot project grant proposal going in for Archive It, for web archiving. That's part of the Born Digital Archives group, and that includes an assessment and white paper related to future assessment and service and program evaluation. And our grantsmanship processes are totally fabulous. Besta Farber, our grants manager, actually has a book coming out on it, on grants, grants for nonprofits, grants for libraries. But the full process includes assessment built into it, and that's some of the things that we bring out whenever we're in collaboration with different partners. So the assessment that's built in includes a feasibility meeting and evaluation before we even really get a proposal underway. And then we have a pre-award process that supports it moving throughout the pre-award proposal submission, post-award, an assessment then embedded within the proposals and the projects themselves, not only as part of the regular grant reporting, but also as part of our internal building a culture of grantsmanship, a community of practice. And that was a lot pretty fast. And Hannah, I see you're on the call. I didn't know if you wanted to add.
I think you covered most of it. It just, as you mentioned, with new folks coming in, I think that'll be a great opportunity for us to kind of think a little more systematically, because these are a lot of assessment things that we're doing for individual pieces of the picture, but I don't know that we've looked kind of big picture in an assessment way at our research data management activities. And then also we have done a number of trainings in various venues, and so some of that has been internal training for other library staff, and that is through our regular HR system, so there were some evaluations that were available for that. We had a workshop targeted towards grad students a year-ish ago, year and a half ago, and we had an evaluation for that. So those kind of ongoing activities we also generally do have evaluations for.
Yeah, we're very assessment-oriented. And again,
yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lori and Hannah. Sue from UNLV, the floor is yours.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, great. Sorry that it's so small. So we are still trying to figure out what the library's role will be, of course, like many of us in this group. And we were trying last year to get a survey out, kind of a homegrown survey, and it failed. And I don't know the history behind that. This is kind of content from John, and he can't be here. So the good news is that we were able to participate in the Ithaca Survey. And I noticed in my quick research that the core areas of the survey for faculty, which I just put in the chat box, include research practices, including data curation practices. And two of the questions that I think will be extremely useful to us in evaluating what people think the libraries are already doing, which will be interesting, and what they might like the libraries to do will be how important to your research are the following types of data, and when you think about managing your data, what are the different features and services that you want. And as I recall from taking the survey, there's a tie to the library and what services the library is already providing to them. We expect to get these results early next year, and we're working with Jason right now on our consults to make some recommendations to campus about what they might want to look for and what process they might follow to create a campus-wide data management policy. And this request came to us through upper admin channels to one of the library's administrators, and of course got bumped down to John and I to work through with DLF. So exciting things on the horizon. Not sure what it will look like, but I'm sure liaisons will be a key part of it.
Great. Thanks so much, Sue. University of Richmond, do you have your audio? I see you're here. There you go. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
Richmond, we can hear you.
You can. Okay, great. This is Samantha. I'm here with Patricia, Melanie, and Krista from University of Richmond. I think we have the benefit of going toward the end here because we get to hear lots of great ideas for assessment. But we too don't really have a program for research data management yet. So when we figure out what that program, what those services will be, then we'll have a better idea of how we plan to assess those programs. And I think we have made some progress on that throughout the DLF Institute. But we made this slide that just has the relationships on it, just to underscore again how incredibly important that is at a school like ours, which is a small liberal arts school. And I heard a couple of other people say the same thing, Caltech and some others, that a lot of this work is one-off, one-on-one, looking for pilot projects and assessing those, how it went as we go, and I think that's exactly the approach that we're trying to take to some of the other things I heard people talk about were totally resonated with me too, I think. And I think for us, a lot of it will be building on previous work that has been done in scholarly communication and institutional repository in programming and seeing who comes and generating interest in how they're using our services and all that too. Do you all want to add anything? Okay, so I think that's all from us for today.
Okay, before we turn to the last bit of discussion, I wanted to maybe give, if Lori and Chelsea, if you don't feel like typing the track question, if you wanted to pick that up with your mic, that's fine as well. I guess for me, I was wondering if there was, when you get into this idea of trusted repository, because I'm not as familiar with track certification or what that process looks like, are you required to have X amount of personnel associated with your archival process or your repository process? A certain amount of funding associated with it. I guess that's an interesting metric that I just go ahead if you have.
Yeah, so it gets really, I'm, I guess, sort of a member of the club of people who study very boring things. That's what the people who study standards call themselves, or ourselves. It's really, really interesting stuff, but really boring in some ways. But how we think about standards and how we make things visible and invisible, and how do you, it's a really important concept for how do you certify trust? How do you say that an institution is trusted? Because you can have the perfect technology, but that doesn't mean people are operating it properly. It doesn't mean that they're funded and they're going to go on. And so the track process was developed by NASA and other groups working together for how do we say that someone is certified for trust so that we know that this, this is observational data. It cannot be recreated if we lose the data from the different telescopes and things. And so how do we certify trust to know that this is going to be preserved? It's going to be accessible in the future. And so a lot of that's your organizational infrastructure. So it's very much socio-technical, the people, the policies, the communities, and then the technologies. So finances are a part of it. And how do you respond to what if your institution fails? Well, the University of Florida is a public land-grant institution. We're the oldest institution in the state. We are a part of the state of Florida. For us to fail, the state of Florida would have had to have failed. Is that conceivably possible? It's possible. It's very unlikely that the state of Florida is going to fail. But so what would you do if the state of Florida did fail? And so some of this seems kind of like a weird thought exercise, but at the same time, it's not, because where would those materials go if the University of Florida fails, or let's say they just defund the libraries? These things aren't very likely to happen, but aren't very likely doesn't mean that you don't have to have a thought process for how you would work through them and how you would respond to them. So looking at the finances and knowing that finances are part of the discussion. Financial optimization is as important as technical optimization, and the two are mutually informative. Because so often with technologies, you talk about, do you want it fast? Do you want it fast, or do you want it right? Or do you want and so fast, right, or cheap. So you can pick one of three. And so thinking about how these things work together for the best solution, and then how do you certify trust on that? So part of the, and thanks Rita for sending out the actual ISO standard. So some of it you do delineate, here are the people who are in these roles. And that helps you identify if you have someone who's doing more than they should, then that's obviously an institutional weakness. If they're working outside of their job scope in an area, or if you have a situation where everything works as long as so-and-so doesn't leave, or doesn't, and lives forever. As long as we solve that immortality problem, that's not a way that you can certify trust at the institutional level. So having those things exposed by going through the process of documenting it, and then addressing that here are areas of concern, and here are the ways that we expect to work through it. So it's a lot of data gathering, and then it's a lot of consideration, synthesizing, working with administrators, working with your HR folks, working with fiscal folks. So a lot of things that we've done for different grants are wonderfully supportive in informing the process. And a good bit is also on the technology. And technology, not just of, okay, so here's our software, but also here's our hardware. Where is it located? We're in Florida. So we're in the middle of the state. We're landlocked. It would have to be a really amazingly bad storm for us to have problems. And if we do, our data center has built the Cat 5 standards for a hurricane in Miami, which that's never happened and is extremely unlikely to happen. University of North Texas, their data centers are near to each other, but they're not in the right directional for tornadoes. So addressing some of those things, like here are some of the threats from a risk management perspective, and then here are some of the ways that we're addressing those threats, or that we're aware of them and we're mitigating them. So it's a really, really useful process to go through and think about, what are you tracking? What are you assessing? How are you doing it? How is evaluation embedded in everything you do? Because sometimes if you're just like, oh, this is a great technology, this is a great way to solve the problem, well, what problem are we solving? I mean, one of the things that I say, even as a technologist pretty often in meetings, is, technology doesn't dictate policy. We work from policy, and then we figure out the technology. And track really helps us to frame that, and helps to frame how technology is in conversation with our policies, with our needs, especially as we develop new supports for data management, for digital scholarship, for all sorts of areas. So I'd highly encourage you to read the Magenta book, the Red book, the sample audits that people have done, Hadi Trust and others, where they've shared their audit materials online, and then working with the University of North Texas, we're sharing our materials as they're available. And our process is going slow because it's a lot to do.
Mm-hmm.
That might have been more than you wanted. Sorry.
No, it's great. It's great.
I've had a lot of caffeine.
Okay. Related to this, as we move into the last 20 minutes of the session, we had kind of talked through and built up this idea of a topic for Webinar 6 related to assessment metrics of success. How do we know that the programs are starting to work, or what are we looking for when we try to define success? I think one of the questions I had for the group, just as we get started turning towards the group readings, are you getting these questions from your administrators? Are people, are they asking for this kind of information? I know a lot of us are in early stages of just starting to put services in place, but I'd like to hear from the group as to when we start to look at statistics that might build support for these programs, are we even getting that question yet? I guess I'd like to just start the discussion there. People who have heard things or are required by their administration to come up with these data points that help the administration understand that this is a valuable service or a growing service. I guess I'd like to start, there's this analytical turn that we've started to take with this particular session. Is that something that's been asked for by our leaders? Anybody's experience with that? I see people are typing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an interesting comment from Gretchen in Richmond, that just trying to stay in front of it, because we know that assessment is a way that we're going to be able to show if a service is performing or if it is being successful. Mm-hmm. Gretchen, so it sounds like in most cases this is almost formalized, and some people are being proactive, where others are, even though it hasn't been asked for, we still follow through. So what I've actually pulled up related to what our discussion is the actual thread from today. So were there other pieces of the people wanted to draw out of the readings to speak to? We kind of Lori picked up on the track idea, but there are other things within the group activity and topic if we wanted to. Things like Gail speaking to the what exactly is the scope of an IR? What are the services that are part of that, and how would we measure those services? Open to questions, and we can hand if it's easier, we can hand the you can feel free to take the mic. So Laura and Chelsea asked about the data champion idea. And we can use the chat board or if anybody wants to speak. I don't know if Sara is still on. I think she is. One of the things I think from the census that she could start to discern was that there are more likely people that are sharing or interested in data, and those are potential early champions.
This is Kendall. I just wanted to add something. And when I was at University of Alberta, one of the ways that I found those data champions was just looking at who was already trying to address some of these issues on campus and within networks. Like at UF, you have the CTSI, and there we had a group in the faculty of medicine, and they had gotten to the point where they had dealt with data collection, electronic data collection, and data management, but we're still trying to wrap their head around what to do in terms of long-term stewardship and sort of what to do as they reach the 5-year mark. So that wasn't something that was necessarily on the radar, and just talking to folks and asking, how are you dealing with these issues, ended up connecting me to a whole network of people in that area that were already trying to solve the solutions. It also clued me into a lot of attempts in the past that had not worked out. So some great learning opportunities by talking to those folks.
Sue also mentions that the workshops themselves can be a recruitment point for data champions, those people that show up and show interest, whether they're grad students, undergraduate students, or faculty members.
And this is Margaret. I would say that I don't think we've really found any champions yet here, but having the workshops and even just having conversations with faculty, we've found people that are interested or they're curious, or even if, that we've been in touch with some people who are just like not the right people for our pilot project at all, but they, they're our allies. Like, they recognize that we're taking this up and have been sharing that and kind of trying to keep us in the loop. To the best of my knowledge, they're keeping us in the loop with what's going on in their department. So just, I think, being very open about it and doing things like the workshops and having conversations, that's been the best way that we've made connections, I think.
Reader's typing. Yeah. Other comments? Any or other threads we wanted to pick up? I guess I would add that in collecting doing the lit review and starting to bring these resources together, and thanks to Plato, Kendall, Margarita for helping build the lit review and figuring out which articles we might use. There isn't as much, a lot of the assessment tends to focus on should we implement a service. I feel like the field isn't quite, we're at early stages, and so we're not at that point where we're saying, what are we trying to measure as an impactful service? So I think there's an opportunity for us to think, as an eResearch network cohort, but also as a profession to think how best to start to introduce further ideas around impactful service, not just the service itself. I don't know, Kendall or Plato or Margarita, feel free to jump in there if that's kind of what you were seeing with the lit review too. Looks like she's typing one more time. Yeah, that's a great idea. Kendall just brought up the idea of starting to look maybe at other disciplines that are thinking about assessment and see what that evaluation literature looks like. Because we did stay within the library science field in our review. So Kendall, what fields would you think, are you thinking sociology?
So I'm just going to use this.
Yeah, go for it.
I think there's that interdisciplinary work that that you get into program evaluation coming from across the social sciences and also health. So I think that as well as in education. So even some of I've been looking a little bit at some of the, at Purdue, they're really focused around the information literacy and course redesigns and this type of thing. So some of that, I mean, there's a little bit of data information literacy, but some of just the ways in which the use of coming out of educational theory and practice, rubrics, looking for educational programs and workshops, that kind of assessment that's happening both in the libraries and outside. So I think that there's some literature there in the LIS literature, but there's also this broader different threads, that I think might be useful to pull on that are informed by these longer standing traditions.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. And thanks for your patience, because it's kind of this asynchronous discussion sort of requires patience, because we're typing, we're talking, but this is good. Thank you. Margaret just says assessment librarians might help too. So it looks like we have about 8 minutes left, and I did want to give Rita a chance to frame what the meeting, the in-person meeting will look like. The people that works with the cohort that will be on site will be Plato, myself, and Rita. And we're looking at, it's a Wednesday afternoon, and we have a guest speaker. Rita, did you want to speak a little bit more about the event
Sure.
and the plans? Maybe give people a chance to ask questions if they have them.
So our in-person meeting is scheduled for Wednesday afternoon from 2 to 5 p.m. in Salon E. E as in Edward, in the Pinnacle Hotel. We will have a guest speaker. Our guest speaker is Eugene Barsky, and he's the Research Data Management Librarian at the University of British Columbia. So he'll speak to us. We'll have about an hour set aside for his presentation and time for question and answer. We've got a couple of short breaks built into our program as well as a group activity that we are in the process of finalizing. Jason, Plato, and I will, as he said, be on site, and we're also working this week just to put the final touches on the schedule. I'd like to get that out to you Friday, Monday at the latest. So look for that coming through Clear Connect. Also, we've planned an informal get-together from 5:30 to 6:30. It'll be happy hour format, where we are also going to invite members of our previous cohort as well as attendees who have expressed interest in joining the 2016 cohort. So that's something I've been working with Bethany and Louisa Quasigras on. So we've got an hour slated for that, and that's from 5:30 to 6:30 Wednesday evening in the hospitality suite. And the only other thing I'd add about our in-person meeting is, we encourage you all to get together informally for dinner, that kind of thing, if as you see fit. And again, look for the details coming. And that's all I have. I do want to say on behalf of CLEAR and DLS, thank you, everyone, for participating in this year's cohort. Thank you to our faculty and postdoctoral fellows for the work they have done in making this a really great experience. So I will hand it off back to Jason. Jason, do you have any closing remarks? Or are there any questions? Are any questions about the in-person meeting? If it's helpful, I can send a list out with a schedule of all that is all of those of you that are attending in person.
I think that would be helpful. It's worth mentioning that Sara, our speaker today, will also be there, and she's planning on attending at least the happy hour, perhaps even the on-site meeting. So another way that we can make contact with her, which would be great. And then I think I'd also like to thank, no, I don't think, I know I would like to thank Rita for all of her service and work on this project the last couple of years. Rita is leaving CLEAR at the end of the calendar year, is that right, Rita? And so just a moment of thank you for all the work you've put together to make this happen over the years. It's really a great resource. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jason. That was nice of you. It has truly been a pleasure. And I do want to just back up and address Gretchen's question about pre-work. If anything, there may be some readings, but we are still hammering out those fine details, Gretchen. It won't be much of anything for you to do. We really, one thing we would like for you all to think about is attending the forum itself in addition to our in-person meeting. What are you going to be attending and why? What's of interest to you? How would that inform our group meeting? That might be something we can discuss while we're in person. So if you have ideas, feel free to post those in Clear Connect. And take a good long look at the form schedule that's posted online. So that's all I have. And again, thank you, Jason, for your help today, and thanks to all of you. And see you in Vancouver.
Thanks, everyone.